Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Friday Ramblings. I am your host, David the Bardic 1, and we are here to finish up January with a wonderful little treat. And I do mean a little treat, because we are talking about the legacy of DC's The Atom. Now, this isn't a simple case of two or three people simply using the same identity over the course of several decades. Nope, we actually have a couple bonus characters who are linked to the Atom legacy that we're going to discuss as well, which means there's a lot to cover for a molecular-sized man. But are they all molecular-sized? We don't know. We have to discuss it. Let's go ahead and get out a few little disclaimers first and foremost. First up, these are, as always, brief summaries designed to introduce you to characters you may or may not be familiar with, because we here at Roulette Productions want to encourage you to get into all the stuff we discuss on your own, not simply feel like, hey, you watch this video, you know everything you need to know, there's no reason to read these comics. No, you should. They're awesome. Get into it. That's what this is all about, introducing you to entertainment you may not be familiar with. Second disclaimer is that whenever discussing things DC Comics, make a cutting off point at Flashpoint. This is because I, as a comic book reader, do not like Flashpoint. I do not like what they did with Flashpoint in the New 52 and everything that has come since, which has basically been them trying to fix the massive mistake that the New 52 that was set off by the Flashpoint event really is. So with that, yeah, we're gonna just not talk about it. Doesn't make me happy. In my mind, DC Comics ended when the Flashpoint event began. It's not something I deal with anymore. And frankly, I want to encourage people to get deeper into history than the last 10 or 20 years of comics. Because, of course, like all these hero legacies we discussed, DC's The Atom started in the Golden Age, which means it started pretty far back. The Golden Age Atom was Al Pratt and debuted in October of 1940 in All-American Comics. Now, like many of the Golden Age heroes, Al Pratt did not initially have any superpowers. He was simply a costumed do-gooder, hence the term at the time of mystery men. They were not technically superheroes, as they had no superpowers. They were simply people whose identity was not publicly known, hence mystery, who ran around and fought crime, like policemen. I know now we would say like police officers because of, gender neutrality. But again, we're talking about the 40s. You didn't see a lot of females on the police force. That's just kind of the thing it was. Policemen. It's the times. We do not judge the culture for what it is. But we do note that we did continue to grow as a culture. Still, there's nothing wrong with the Golden Age adventures of Al Pratt. Al himself was a wonderful character. Al Pratt was called the Atom because he was a shorter than average man, and as such was often bullied for his short height. At 5 foot 1 inch and 98 pounds, Al Pratt was definitely not going to win any World's Strongest Man contests. However, instead of simply letting it define him and living his life as a bullied weakling, Al Pratt was trained to fighting condition by ex-boxer Joe Morgan, who would also train Al Pratt's peers, Wildcat and the original Guardian. Pratt then became a founding member of the Justice Society of America, who we do love, and appeared in many of the team's stories during their original Golden Age appearances. Early on, Al Pratt describes himself to his fellow JSAers as a quiet sophomore at Calvin College. He later became a founding and active member of the All-Star Squadron, and during World War II, Pratt served as a tank driver for the United States Army. In 1948, the Atom did gain super strength as a result of the latent effects of a 1942 battle with the reluctant supervillain Cyclotron, causing Pratt to redesign his costume, both as an homage to Cyclotron and to better reflect his changing status as a legit superhero. It was later revealed he also took partial custodianship of Cyclotron's daughter, Terry. Unfortunately, the Golden Age ended in the early 50s with the last Golden Age Justice Society story. It was revealed a few decades later as a tie-up of the Golden Age stories that the Justice Society disbanded officially in storylines when a Senate investigation panel had moved to obtain the identities of all active superheroes. At this point, Pratt married his longtime girlfriend, Mary James, and retired to live a quiet life. Now, seemingly, this would be the end of Al Pratt's stories. However, nothing ends forever, and when the Golden Age was brought back in The Flash comics, as The Flash began journeying between Earths 1 and 2 to meet with his Golden Age counterpart, we saw the rest of the team. Later in the Atom comic books, our Silver Age Atom of Ray Palmer, who we will be discussing shortly, created an invention that allowed him to meet his own counterpart and travel between Earths 1 and 2 without the help of the Flash. At this point, Al Pratt is seen as being a professor at Calvin College, possessing a modified automobile that transfers from an ordinary convertible to an Atommobile. This would be all good, and a lot of fun adventures between the two Atoms would take place. The Atom's status with the JSA was stated in these later stories to be a reserve member up until after the formation of Infinity Inc. Following the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Last Days of the Justice Society special, which I believe we briefly discussed when initially talking about the Justice Society, showed how the Atom, along with various other members of the Justice Society, entered into a magic-based pocket dimension, seemingly for all eternity, where they would fight an endless cycle of Ragnarok to preserve the rest of the universe. This was basically done as a way to acknowledge that the JSA existed in the new post-crisis Earth as the heroes of the World War II era, yet at a time when no writers were interested in using them, kind of send them off while still being heroes in their own right. Nobody really wanted to kill any of the Justice Society members, just make it clear you shouldn't expect them guest starring in comics going forward. However, it was only about 6 years later that the miniseries Armageddon Inferno, brought the JSA back into the post-crisis world. Al Pratt joined the team in the short-lived Justice Society revival series. Al was depicted as a short, stocky, balding man with radioactive, superpowered hands and a body aged to about 60 years. Al was also written as a man similar to a lot of the Justice Society members in the even later volumes of the Justice Society, which again we've discussed in previous videos, as being more interested in training this next generation of superheroes than going off and adventuring himself. Sadly, Al Pratt's story would end with his murder by the temporal villain Extant, formerly known as Monarch, during the 0 Hour event when Extant aged Al Pratt to the point that his body physically could not hold out any longer. However, remember when we said there's a couple bonus heroes who were not technically Adams but had to be discussed during the Adam Legacy? Well, that is Al Pratt's legacy. Because we have 2 big ones for you, folks. Woo! Two for the price of 1 legacy. In the 1980s, Al Pratt's godson Al Rothstein was introduced. Rothstein was at that point known as the superhero Nuklon of Infinity Inc. After that team's departure, changing his name to Atom Smasher, along with adjusting his costume to look more like his grandfather Al Pratt's. Atom Smasher would later serve in the Justice League of America, the Suicide Squad, and eventually in the more modern, revived Justice Society of America, in many ways bringing his character full circle as he joined the team that he had initially wanted to join to uphold his grandfather's legacy back when his superhero career started. This, of course, we had discussed in previous videos, being the point of Infinity Inc., the next generation of heroes who weren't quite ready yet to be the Society. Similar to the Teen Titans to the Justice League. Atom Smasher himself would, while serving with the Justice Society of America, controversially get justice for his grandfather's murder when he himself murdered Extant. This is all good. He's actually an extremely interesting character, especially as portrayed in the modern JSA books, and has had the good fortune to make his appearance in the CW DC-based shows, specifically being portrayed by Adam Copeland, also known as WWE's Edge. In his initial appearance, he is portrayed as a villainous character. However, he is found out to have been manipulated and was not actually that bad a guy after all by the end of the episode. The second legacy character for Al Pratt would be the superhero known as Damage. In 1994, it was revealed that Pratt had a son named Grant Emerson. Al Pratt was unaware of this. He'd been told there were complications and the child had not survived childbirth. Al's wife was at the time suffocated by the villain Vandal Savage, who kidnapped the infant Grant and genetically altered him into a super being. These powers showed up in puberty, leading to him being a superhero, as we said, taking the name Damage, due to his powers tending to be more based around the force of atomic blasts, similar to Al's endgame powers shown shortly before his demise, than any sort of growth-based powers, which would be more of Nucleon Atom Smasher, and itself more of a reference to the Silver Age Ray Palmer and his follow-up, which we'll touch on shortly as well. This means that, in a lot of ways, while Atom Smasher represented Al's more heroic legacy, having a couple flaws, but generally being somebody who believed in the heroic ideal, Grant Emerson was a troubled young man whose destructive powers more represented the modern versions of comic book writing where characters can sometimes be more powerful than is good for them before they get training. Damage himself would most famously start off in Georgia, where he would cause extensive damage to downtown Atlanta while battling Baron Blitzkrieg. The deal is cut with Grant Emerson. He would be banned from Georgia for the rest of his life and remained in the custody of then federally sponsored Titans team led by Arsenal. Damage himself goes through a lot of trouble dealing with the fact that he destroyed most of a major city and murdered people in the process, as well as the fact that he was basically a walking experiment, and his powers were owed to the immortal villain Vandal Savage as much as his biological heritage. Also that because he was an experiment, he was kept in stasis for many decades, which is why, even though he's the son of Al Pratt, and Al Rothstein is technically born later, Al is older than Grant. So it's, it's a thing. Now, when the original Titans eventually reformed the group after they had disbanded for a while, Arsenal nominates Damage for membership, feeling that the kid has not yet lived up to his potential. In order to help get Arsenal set up as a member of the Titans in good standing, Arsenal manages to erase Grant's criminal records, so he was no longer a fugitive. Eventually, Damage leaves the Titans seeking peace with a troubled past centered around suffering abuse at the hands of the foster father he was raised by. Eventually, Damage would join the Justice Society of America, the All-Star Squadron, and a new team of government-sponsored freedom fighters. He would clash with Rothstein, aka Nucleon, aka Atom Smasher, about living up to Al Pratt's legacy. The two butting heads, basically in a older brother, younger brother sibling dynamic, even though technically Grant Emerson would be the uncle of Rothstein. As we said, being stuck in stasis, yada yada, it's all in good fun. Eventually, the modern-day Freedom Fighter team, with the exception of Damage and a couple others, is killed by the Injustice Society in the opening pages of the Infinite Crisis event. Although Damage survives, his face is horribly scarred, and he once again descends into anger and depression. It is with this mindset that he appears in the Justice Society of America wearing a full mask and costume, more closely resembling that of his father, Al Pratt, and Atom Smasher, thus bringing him more closely tied in with the Atom legacy. Working with the team, Grant, blah blah blah, manages to find some measure of peace, mostly due to his attraction to fellow teammate Judo Master and her mutual attraction to him. However, Grant did not have a nice ending, as during the Blackest Night event, the JSA were attacked by their fallen members, now reanimated as the zombie-esque Black Lanterns. Damage was saved from Black Lantern Al Pratt by the Silver Age Atom, but was then killed by Black Lantern Jean Loring, who we will discuss in a moment. His was one of the highly significant deaths of the Blackest Night event. Following Blackest Night, a funeral for Damage is held, attended by the JSA, with Judo Master doing a eulogy for Damage. It is then revealed that Damage, having foreseen his death by one of teammate Sand's prophetic dreams, had recorded his last will for Judo Master, wishing her a better life and revealing he had planned to get cosmetic surgery on his scarred face. Spurred by his will, Judo Master, aka Sonia Sato, decides to anonymously fund several relief funds for the victims of collateral damage caused by Grant's powers during the various battles he had had over the years that would cause issues due to his, as I said, main power being boom, boom, punches that hit with the force of a bomb. So, now we get to jump to the Silver Age and the Atom that most people think of when they think of the Atom, and that is Ray Palmer. Ray Palmer was a scientist who was experimenting with matter. Blip. Let's try this again, folks. Ray Palmer was a physicist and professor at Ivy University in the fictional city of Ivy Town, which is stated to be somewhere in New England. Specializing in matter comprehension as means to fight overpopulation and similar problems. Using a mass of white dwarf star matter he finds after it lands on Earth, Palmer fashions a belt that allows him to shrink any object to any degree he wishes. Palmer, needing to help save various people, including his lawyer girlfriend Jean Loring. Remember I said this would be significant later? During a cave-in, uses the shrinking power on himself to save the day and subsequently becomes the Atom, while continuing to date and eventually marry Jean Loring. Eventually, though, Atom's superhero career would especially his various adventures with the Justice League of America, cause problems with his marriage, as he was gone for large chunks of time, and when he was home, he was busy working on his superhero side, which Jean Loring, although she tried to be a part of, including helping the Justice League with various legal issues that would pop up here and there, was never truly a part of. Jean would cheat with on Ray Palmer with fellow lawyer Paul Hoban. And Palmer would journey to a microscopic kingdom for a short time, basically seeking to escape his life until it made sense again. However, things happen, and Palmer would be dragged back into the regular world. At this time, we would get the shortest lived of the Atoms, as Palmer, needing to investigate corruption within the federal government, specifically the CIA, as well as some shrinking power-based supervillains known as the Micro Squad, would get involved with a young man named Adam Cray, who was the son of a recently assassinated senator. In exchange for helping Adam solve his father's murder, Ray Palmer faked his death, equipped Adam Cray with a new costume with the same shrinking powers, and got Cray recruited onto the Suicide Squad as the new Adam, Cray encouraging various members of the squad to suspect this was Ray Palmer himself, thus creating a kind of double-blind situation. Palmer would infiltrate the Micro Squad as part of his side of the investigation. Sadly, Adam Cray would be killed by Deadshot, or excuse me, Black Snake. Deadshot was on the Suicide Squad at the time. And I believe, if I remember the story right, but don't quote me as Bible, blind faith here. I believe Cray was suspected that Deadshot, as a known assassin and hitman, had been the one to kill his father. But, yes, the Micro Squad leader Black Snake kills Cray, and Palmer reveals his own double identity in order to expose Black Snake and bring him to justice. A short while later, during the events of Zero Hour, Palmer is rejuvenated to a teenage state and develops the ability to grow in height in addition to his previous abilities, all of which he is now capable of controlling innately without the use of his White Dwarf Star-based equipment. He then becomes field leader of an all-new group of Teen Titans, composed of alien-human hybrids, which was the thing. It was not a horrible volume. Some of the members would go on to greater fame in later, more traditional versions of the Teen Titans, but it happened. During this time, Adam would continue to adventure and do his best to be a hero in his own right, while dealing with the fact that he was now much younger than his peers in the Justice League. Although Ray eventually does regain his original age and memories, however, losing his new powers, this process was initially out of his control and threatening his life, but time travel-based hero Wave Rider stabilizes Ray Palmer by getting a DNA sample of Palmer from before his initial de-aging in order to stabilize him. Al Pratt would later return to his... Excuse me, not Al Pratt. We're talking about Ray Palmer right now. Yes, we are. Ray Palmer would eventually return to his teaching job at Ivy University, where one of his notable students was Ronnie Raymond, the hero known as Firestorm, who, having been separated from his original mentor, scientist Martin Stein, was trying to learn more about chemistry from Palmer so that he could use his elemental transfiguration powers as Firestorm to their full potential without Martin Stein there to guide him. And this all leads up to the darkest period in Ray Palmer's life. Now I know, hey, what could be worse than getting, having your wife cheat on you and the kids you were trying to do right by get murdered because everybody thought he was you? It's just, yeah, what could be worse than that? Oh, trust me, it gets worse. In the 2004-2005 limited series Identity Crisis, Jean Loring, having suffered a bit of a mental breakdown, kills Sue Dibney, the wife of the elongated man, using some of the Atom's shrinking technology and a spare costume to do so. She later subsequently arranges a hit on Tim Drake, aka Robin 3's father, which is carried out by Captain Boomerang, intending for Jack Drake to kill Boomerang, who at this point was washed up and considered by many to be an almost harmless supervillain. Unfortunately, Boomerang actually pulls the hit off, in a sense, the two men killing each other. Palmer manages to figure everything out, and confronting Jean Loring, she fully snaps, discussing how she did that all of this was a situation that got out of control and was originally about trying to get Ray Palmer to romantically reunite with Jean, as she had felt like that was the best time in her life. Palmer's response is to commit her to Arkham Asylum before shrinking himself to microscopic size and disappear. Palmer eventually meets up with his old friend Carter Hall, aka Hawkman, who we will be discussing soon. Because, woo, Hawkman's an adventure. Trying to warn Carter Hall of the consequences of Identity Crisis before stating that he needs time away. This would lead to Atom's direct legacy kicking in, although we will touch on that in a minute. We do need to finish off Al Pratt's little hero journey here. And which would come about a few years later in a series tying into Final Crisis known as Countdown, where Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, Donna Troy, and Jason Todd scour the multiverse for the former Atom, who apparently is the key to saving reality from the upcoming Final Crisis. The group eventually tracks Palmer to Earth 51, where he has assumed the life of its native Palmer, after Earth 51's Palmer had his life cut short during his studies of the multiverse and discovery of the looming crisis. Eventually, Ray Palmer would return to Earth Prime in time to help out. He would join in the adventures of the Blackest Night, where he is saved from death by the Indigo Tribe, who would subsequently temporarily deputize him during the Blackest Night event. Final battle, Palmer gets his ultimate wish and greatest desire to have his best friend Carter Hall and his partner Hawk Girl, who had been killed earlier in the Blackest Night event, brought back to life by the White Lantern. Ray Palmer would continue during the Brightest Day era to assist various people connected to the White Lantern, including the modern Firestorm of Jason Rush and his new partner Ronnie Raymond, the previous Firestorm we discussed, while continuing to serve as a reserve member of the JLA. So let's polish everything up with the man who temporarily replaced Ray Palmer when he went missing following identity crisis, and that is Ryan Choi. Born in Hong Kong, Ryan Choi is a longtime protege of Ray Palmer who had been corresponding with him through letters. After Palmer's disappearance, Ryan moved to Ivytown in America to assume his mentor's place on the staff of Ivy University. Following clues left by Palmer, Ryan discovered a biobelt, which was basically a upgraded version of the original size-changing belt Ray Palmer used early in his career, and became the new Atom with Palmer's apparent blessing. Eventually, Ryan would find out that he was being manipulated by one of Ray Palmer's old enemies, Kronos, the Time Traveler. However, by this point, Ray Palmer had returned to Earth Prime and embraced Ryan Choi's status as the new Atom, helping serve as a mentor to the young hero. Ryan Choi would subsequently encourage the size-changing villainous Giganta to attempt at reform, even getting romantically involved with her. Ryan Choi eventually feels that there really is no point to having two Atoms operating in Ivytown and the JLA, wanting to build an identity for himself, despite Ray Palmer's blessing that Ryan, being younger and more eager, as well as possessing a lot of potential to do most of the adventuring as the Atom. Although the two would continue to team together until Ryan could figure out who he is for himself. All this would lead to the Brightest Day event when Ryan is murdered by Deathstroke and his new team of evil Titans during their first mission together. His corpse is then delivered in a matchbox to villainous Dwarf Star, who's the man who hired the Titans. Short time later, Deathstroke is shown to have kept Ryan Choi's size-changing belt, trying to take it apart and use some of the technology for his own purposes. This being culminated in the end of this Evil Titan storyline. However, in the meantime, Ray would begin an investigation into the disappearance of Ryan, who had not been confirmed as murdered quite yet. Eventually, it is revealed who murdered him, and Amanda Waller, leader of the Suicide Squad, an occasional affiliate of Checkmate when she's not getting herself into trouble because of her habit of manipulating people. Amanda Waller does tell Giganta about Dwarf Star's hand in Ryan's murder, and Giganta then promptly lures Dwarf Star to a hotel room where she pummels him to submission, tapes his mouth shut, and tortures him. Ray eventually finds Dwarf Star in a hospital who is recovering from the severe injuries he sustained from his torture at the hands of Giganta. Dwarf Star would confess, hoping it would get him a lighter prison sentence. Ray's response is to go tell this to the Justice League before pointing out to Dwarf Star, "Buddy, you just messed up. When word gets out you revealed the truth, Deathstroke's going to come to shut you up before you can testify." Deathstroke, however, would escape Ray Palmer's attempts for justice. Now, I said we're not generally going to touch on the post-Flashpoint history, but I will say for the record, post-Flashpoint Ryan Choi was eventually resurrected due to the reality-changing events of Flashpoint and Convergence and 50 other we're going to screw with continuity and reality events they've done since, because DC can't leave well enough alone. And that's why we don't discuss Flashpoint and everything that came after it. You see, even just trying to lightly touch on it sets me off. But yes, they did eventually bring Ryan Choi back to life, where he has continued to adventure as one Atom. So with that, we're going to wrap everything up and say I thank you for watching. Please check out the adventures of Al Pratt, Ray Palmer, Ryan Choi, Al Rothstein, and Grant Emerson. They're all wonderful characters who, throughout their careers, were deeply tied into many great events in DC Comics history, being members of basically every major DC Comics superhero team and a few minor ones. Which means when it comes to the power of the Atom, whether it's punches, or teeny tiny little shrinking, or the occasional big shrinking, enlarging, the fact is you cannot discuss DC history without touching on the Atom in one of his many identities. So, tune in next week and next month, because we got some great videos planned for February and beyond. Subscribe, hit your notification bell, leave comments, like it, tell your friends to watch, because it's all good.